Hi, good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining me. And today I'm going to be raising the attention to probably one of the most important interviews that I've done. Now, I've done some pretty big interviews in the past, one of them being Gert van den Bosch, another one being the first one with Dr. Shankar Shetty. This one with Professor Nikolai Petrovsky is another one of those interviews that I think everybody should watch. Don't expect to find it easily, and this is why I'm raising awareness about it so that everybody knows. Now, before I share with you a clip from this interview, I'd just like to remind everybody about the fact that we want you to join us with our newsletter here. The link is below. We're covering a number of topics. In the most recent newsletter, we're looking at Alzheimer's, but in the past, we look at immune responses, COVID related stuff, and general health. So it's a very broad newsletter, and it's your way of keeping in contact just in case I disappear because of some of the questions that I ask. So please make sure to join us in this journey with our newsletter. But back to this question about really what was safe and effective? Where did it come from? And listening to Professor Petrovsky, now you have to understand he's a vaccine developer himself. He made a protein subunit vaccine, and so he has a really good insight into what happens in the industry, the history, where we are, the views on the different platforms, how they worked, and what his own views are on his own platform. So some people may say he has his own agenda because he has a different form of a vaccine. However, his analysis is extremely clear. So I'm going to play to you a short clip, and I encourage you, look in the description below, look for the link to watch the full video, and let's hear what he had to say. And so when you think back now and you hear about the safe and effective mantra and the vaccine mandates that were rolled out with some of this technology, what goes through your head?
So I think I was again someone who's probably pedantic. I thought you can't say anything is 100% safe and effective. That's simply not true. Aspirin kills people. We have to be honest about that. I mean, it's all about risk and benefit, and I think the whole safe, effective messaging was it was like something a marketing or advertising guy came up with. It wasn't something I think a public health clinician should be um, falling for. It's oversimplification to the point of being almost false. It's a false message, just like all advertising is largely false messaging. It's exaggeration. It's dismissive of potential problems. So I was worried about that. I didn't think that, given these technologies were all really experimental. I mean, we didn't have, experience with any COVID vaccines. So we didn't really know how they were going to behave, both, short, medium, and long term, because we hadn't seen the virus before. We hadn't used mRNA vaccines in any significant way. Maybe 10 or 20 people had had them previously, but those trials had failed and they hadn't been done with the same lipid, coated particles. They didn't have the same mRNA. That was only developed immediately prior to the pandemic. So although people had played with mRNA, it wasn't the same technology. And similarly with adenoviral vectors, we hadn't had a chimpanzee adenoviral vector vaccine, tested extensively in humans before the pandemic. So in truth, these were highly experimental. And as far as I'm concerned, you can't mandate an experimental treatment. That's in breach of all ethical, if not legal, parameters around, protecting people, unless you have a really well-defined, accepted technology. So I don't believe there was a rationale for any mandates. I'm not a supporter of that from a scientific point of view. And as well as that, of course, that we already knew by the end of 2020 that these vaccines were not going to stop transmission. They were not transmission blocking vaccines. And so that took away the whole rationale to mandate them. So not only were the mandates, I think, potentially questionable from a moral, ethical, and lawful basis, because the vaccines were still experimental. But as well as that, they were, had no scientific rational basis, because they were being imposed on the basis this was going to stop transmission, when we already knew that none of the vaccines could stop transmission. So the mandates made no sense, and I think we've since seen some of them ruled unlawful. But again, I think we need to look at this very carefully as to how did those mandates come about, and what happens if we go back into a similar situation in the future. Will they happen again? Because I think they've caused much more damage, and I haven't seen any benefit demonstrated by any of the mandates.
Wow. And so it raises again that messaging question, because it's just fascinating to listen to you explain these things. I wish I had spoken to you 2 years earlier. But the other messaging was this 95% efficacy, which was a relative risk reduction. And how in the world do they get away with that?
Yeah, again, it's advertising hype. I mean, we had marketing guys running public health policy, because scientifically that was an outrageous claim. As you say, it wasn't absolute risk reduction; it was relative risk reduction. It was measured 2 months, on an average of 2 months of follow-up. And vaccines, if you're going to have them, you're interested in their efficacy over years, if not decades. Like yellow fever, we measure it over a lifetime. And the efficacy of these vaccines was being quoted based on 2 months of follow-up. Now, we know, because we had subsequent data, which not from the trials, but that was collected sort of indirectly, that the efficacy fell away to zero over 6 to 12 months. So if you took an average efficacy of these vaccines over 1 or 2 years, it would be close to zero. And yet they, for years and years, and still to this day, you'll still have people claiming, oh, these vaccines are 95% effective. That scientifically is again false, because you have to look at efficacy over time. You can't just take a peak efficacy figure and then say that's how effective the vaccine is. And if you look at these vaccines over, as I say, reasonable periods of time, even 1 to 2 years is a very short time. Their efficacy would be much closer to zero than it would be to 95% in terms of preventing infection. We can talk about severe disease, which is really where the vaccines do have a benefit. But even that does wane, as we've seen with recent data published in the last few weeks, where it's showing that essentially after a year, there's no impact on hospitalisation with the current mRNA vaccines. So even their benefit in terms of reducing severity of disease is short-lived.
As I said, it was probably one of the most important interviews that I had done. And this is what it was. Everything was just right on target. I couldn't have asked for a better discussion. And actually, I think there are some questions that I think need to be answered beyond this that I'd like to catch him and ask again, because he's so direct. He answers the questions directly. I am doing this because I am recommending that everybody should watch this video from start to finish. It's an hour and a half, but it is well worth your time and well worth you listening to. So, final point as I leave, just to remind you that please follow our newsletter. You'll find the link as well for that there. And as well, you will also see the link to the interview as well. So, have a great evening, and we will be sharing with you more information, hopefully, cutting edge research and discussions with scientists. And we look forward to bringing this to you in the near future. Have a great evening.